If you want proof the Rogansphere basically runs like one big group chat, here it is. At some point, almost everyone in it has tried to quietly remove Brendan Schaub, and every single time, somebody accidentally hits reply all. Joe Rogan didn't just drift away from him. He sat him down on a live recording and told him, in front of an audience, to stop getting punched in the head for a living. That is about as close as a friendship gets to a formal exit interview. And it worked. Brendan retired. Case closed. Mission accomplished. Except it wasn't closed. 11 years later, Brendan Schaub is still showing up on Joe Rogan's Fight Night broadcasts. He's still hosting 3 different podcasts. He's still the guy every comedian in that scene either name drops, argues with, or gets dragged into a beef with. The Rogansphere didn't lose him. It just gave him a new job inside the same building. So this isn't another video about Brendan Schaub being cursed or bad at comedy or the reason everyone around him gets famous the second they leave. We've covered that territory. This is a different question, and it's a more interesting one. Why can't this ecosystem, Rogan, the Austin comedy scene, the whole orbit people now just call the Rogansphere, actually let him go? Every time they push, he doesn't leave the room. He just moves to a different chair in it. Think of it less like a curse and more like a group project where one guy keeps getting kicked out of the group chat and somehow keeps getting re-added by someone else in the group. Nobody remembers whose idea that was. Everybody just accepts it happened again. Let's figure out why. Start with the moment everybody already knows because you can't talk about this ecosystem without it. December 2014. Brendan gets knocked out by Travis Brown at UFC 181, finishing his UFC career 2-4 in his last 6 fights. Days later, he's sitting across from Joe Rogan and Brian Callen recording an episode of The Fighter and the Kid, thinking it's a normal show. It is not a normal show. Rogan tells him on tape that he doesn't see him beating any of the top guys in the division anymore, that he's got one foot out the door whether he admits it or not.
You know, you're a sharp dude, and so I know that if you keep going, that's coming. There's no way around that, you know?
True.
And the reality of your skill set and where you at now, I don't see you beating the elite guys. I don't see you beating Cain Velasquez. I don't see you beating Junior Dos Santos. I don't see you beating Fabricio Verdum. You came into fighting fairly late in life. You're a good athlete. You're a strong guy. You're a big guy. And you can do a lot of things because of that. And you're very dedicated. And you're very disciplined. And you get done. But there's a reality of fluidity of movement, of mechanical efficiency of movement that happens when you get a guy who's trained his whole life at a certain aspect of MMA, whether it's wrestling, whether it's kickboxing, whether it's jiu-jitsu. There's a fluidity to their movement that you don't really have.
That there's a version of this where he keeps taking fights and keeps taking damage, and it doesn't end well. Brendan has since said that his own family was furious, not at the loss, at how public the whole thing was. His dad was mad. His brother was mad. Nobody signs up to have their career-ending conversation happen in front of a microphone. 10 months later, Schaub goes on the Joe Rogan Experience and makes it official. Retired.
I can't see myself, and when it comes down to this, I can't see myself in a Reebok kit walking out to that octagon. I can't see myself being like, you know what? Cool, man. Yeah, that's what I'm worth. I'm worth 10 grand to you guys. I'm going to do this, you know? And I have other opportunities. And everything I have, and people think I'm this hater on the UFC or whatever, I owe it to the UFC, man. I'll always be indebted to the UFC. People think I have a problem with Dana White. I definitely don't. If Dana was in trouble and text me right now and said, hey, Schaub, I wish you'd quit talking Reebok or I need help, you got it, man. Cool, done. I'll always be a supporter of the UFC and whatever they need. But for right now, I got to take a step away and focus on this crazy entertainment podcast career I got going on, man. I'm so blessed.
10 wins, 5 losses, a runner-up finish on The Ultimate Fighter, done. And by every measure that matters for actually staying alive and functional past 40, this was the correct call. Nobody in this video is arguing Rogan was wrong. He almost certainly saved the guy several concussions. And within days, not months, days, of that retirement going official, Schaub was already telling reporters he'd bet his own podcast merch was outselling the UFC's official fight kits. Now, read that timeline again. The ink is barely dry on his fighting career, and he's already out here doing math on t-shirt sales. That's not a guy in mourning. That's a guy who already knew which building he was moving into before the movers showed up. Here's the part that's actually interesting, though, and it's the part nobody frames correctly. That intervention only worked on the fighting. It did not work on the friendship, the podcast, the group chat, the guest list, the Christmas card list, whatever you want to call the actual social structure of this scene. Rogan didn't say, and also, I don't want to know you anymore. He said, stop getting hit in the head. Brendan heard that as permission to become a full-time member of the exact same ecosystem, just without the concussions. And that's exactly what happened. Within a year, he's touring stand-up with Callan. Within a few years, he's got his own solo show. He starts calling himself the guy Joe Rogan saved. That's not spin. That's practically his origin story now, the thing he tells on other people's podcasts, the thing that gets brought up basically every time someone introduces him. The intervention was a rebrand.
Well, I mean, obviously Joe gets all the credit, and that's my brother. You know, we talk all the time, and he's major influence in my career, like nobody bigger than him. But I think it should be noted, I've said this before, like I thought, I mean, months before the fight, I said it was my last one. But he, you know, I think he was coming from a good place. You know, he's coming from a really good place trying to protect me. And I think in hindsight, it's like, that was the move. Like, you look at my life now, it's like, yeah, that was the move. Yeah. Now, if I'm working at a UFC gym holding mitts, I'm like, man, Joe, but Joe knows his stuff. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. So he knows his stuff. So, you know, and my family was really mad at Joe. Really, man. I told Joe this. Like, my dad was pissed. My brother was pissed at him for that. Like, you see, you know, it's a little embarrassing. But my brother and my dad didn't know. Is like, you know, before I even walked out for that last UFC fight, I looked at my team before. They were like, you're up, dude. And they're like, 3-2. I looked at my team and went, last one. And they're like, oh, damn. I didn't want to do it. I'm like, I'm never doing this again. So I knew it was the last one, but then the fighter in me when Joe brought that up I was embarrassed and you know, I was pretty emotional. But thank God he did that.
But do you not go like, man, we could have talked about this off camera?
Yeah, and to be honest, you know, when that happened, it was supposed to be a fighter and the kid, and the last second, Brian called and was like, hey, Joe wants to do it with us. I was like, yeah, I don't want to drive there, man. Let's just do it on Fire and the Kid. It'd be better on our show. And he's like, no, we'll do it on Rogan's, but Rogan, that's not actually a JRE. That's a Fire and the Kid on JRE. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a Fire. That's a Fire and the Kid show. I mean, it's our biggest show of all time, but
sure.
We could have talked about whales. It'd still be our biggest show on Rogan.
So if the goal at any point was to get Brendan Schaub out of the Rogan orbit, mission failed spectacularly. They didn't remove a variable from the equation. They just changed what the variable did for a living. Here's a genuinely useful way to measure how central somebody is to a scene. Count how many times other people have to explain them to you. Nobody makes a video explaining who the fourth opener at a comedy show is. Nobody writes an article breaking down some guy's podcast nobody's ever heard of. You only get explained over and over in different formats by different people if you're load-bearing. And by that metric, Brendan Schaub is one of the most load-bearing pieces of furniture in this entire ecosystem. Not because he's the funniest person in it, but because he's the piece everyone keeps needing to reference in order to talk about everyone else. Consider what happened in 2025. An anonymous YouTube essayist going by Elephant Graveyard released a documentary-style breakdown of the whole Rogan-adjacent comedy scene. The mothership in Austin, the loyalty tests, the way an entire circle of comedians built their identity around proximity to one guy. It should have been a niche curiosity. Instead, it did over 2 million views, got passed around by comedians inside the scene, and got name-checked by Mark Maron on a podcast appearance. You don't get that kind of reach unless the thing you're describing has actual cultural weight, unless enough people already have opinions about the Rogansphere as a concept that a 2-hour essay about it counts as entertainment. And Brendan is in that conversation every time, right alongside Rogan, Callan, Hinchcliffe, Tom Segura, the rest of the roster. Not as a footnote, as a fixture. Then there's the term itself. Rogansphere isn't a compliment, and it isn't quite an insult. It's just become shorthand, the way manosphere or podcast bro became shorthand. And Brendan didn't just get filed under it by strangers. He put it on his own website. There's a whole page on his official site, literally titled The Rogansphere, written as a bit poking fun at his own proximity to Rogan. Think about how strange that actually is. Most people, if an entire internet subculture built a slightly mocking nickname around their friendship with someone more famous than them, would not put that nickname on their own homepage. Brendan did. He looked at the box the internet built for him and moved his furniture in. That's not somebody trying to escape a label. That's somebody who has correctly identified that the label is the product. It also tells you something about how big this term has actually gotten. Rogansphere now gets used to describe a whole roster. Rogan himself, Callan, Tony Hinchcliffe, Tom Segura, Bert Kreischer, Andrew Schultz, Ari Shaffir, a rotating cast of others, and Brendan's name shows up on basically every version of that list anyone writes. Forums rank the comedians in it against each other constantly, arguing about who's actually funny and who's just situationally employed. Brendan tends to finish near the bottom of those rankings. He also notably is never left off the list entirely. Every ecosystem that's built around loyalty needs a pressure valve, somebody it's safe to roast, precisely because roasting them doesn't threaten the actual hierarchy. In the Rogansphere, that job title effectively belongs to Brendan. You can hear it constantly if you actually listen to how comedians in this circle talk about each other. He's the answer to who's the worst stand-up in the group. He's the guy other comics compare their own material favorably against. Even MMA media, people who cover fighting for a living, not comedy, have started treating "how's the podcasting going, how's the comedy going" as a rhetorical weapon against him. Ariel Helwani, the MMA journalist, spent a chunk of an MMA hour broadcast doing exactly that after Brendan took a swing at MMA reporters as a group. Helwani ran through the entire resume out loud. College football, arena football, the UFC run, the comedy pivot, and asked, essentially, at what point in that list did you actually get to the top of anything?
Now let's talk about you. College football, how'd that go? How'd NFL go? How did fighting go? How did comedy go? How did podcasting go? How did TV go? Did you achieve your goals? Did you realize your dreams? Did you make it to the top? Was your claim to fame being told by your friend that it was time to move on and it was a great moment? I mean, we talked about it on this show. He put you over. You were the biggest baby face in the biz. You had it. Silver platter. You had it. You were going after everyone. You were on this show, that show. You were the guy, the truth teller. But how did those gigs go? And how are they going now? Don't talk about other people's jobs. Again, you do this fake gimmick where you're like, oh, holier than thou. I just sit back and I stay in my lane. I don't read anything. You do that whole gimmick. Meanwhile, you read everything. You're affected by everything. And then you throw these pot shots. Those who live in glass houses should not throw any kind of stone, ever. And right now, that glass house is, I mean, it is right there. Wherever that, I mean, it is sitting right there. Don't talk about people's jobs. That's how we got into this mess.
That's a rough thing to have said about you on a show with an actual audience. And here's the part that matters for this video specifically. It didn't end the relationship between these two worlds. It's not like MMA media excommunicated Brendan afterward. He's still talked about on those same shows constantly, and the beef itself never actually died. It's resurfaced repeatedly in the years since, including again on Brendan's own golden hour earlier this year. He still pops up in MMA journalism as a recurring character years later because his story keeps getting reused.
And I told you guys this when I talked about it earlier on Finding the Kid. There's a few things. It's like Ellen in LA. When you come to LA, I can guarantee you two things. When you get a parking ticket, you're going to hear Ellen's an asshole.
Yeah.
When you get an MMA, you're going to hear
now
two
take
things.
it easy.
No, hold on. You're going to hear two things. No,
Don't go too. Let's not.
I'm not. You're going to hear two things.
Yeah.
Khabib's the GOAT.
Yeah.
And the journalist is a complete nightmare to work with.
Okay, I don't know.
That's not me. I didn't start that.
But you're already doing it. Now, I don't want to do this.
No, I didn't start that.
But you're being mischievous. Look,
we need journalists. They need to tell the stories of the warriors.
No, you're doing some stuff now. Stop with the machinery. Hold on.
We've been fired from your job.
Now stop.
We've been fired from
I
your job.
told you not to do this.
I'm not doing it. We've been fired from every single job.
Listen. Hold on. All I'm saying is this.
You've been fired from
I
every job.
I don't like this stuff. We are a comedy podcast. I'm not interested in going bad on anybody, especially when I have a nice conversation with this person I've never said anything about.
You didn't, though. That was fake.
It was?
You're seeing his true colors.
It bums me out.
Shining through.
I don't.
You can't help it. He's the Ellen of MMA.
Well, anyway,
He's the Ellen of MMA.
I have nothing.
You remember where there's like the rumblings of like Ellen and Cosby? Remember that shit?
Every few months, somebody in this ecosystem needs a here's what not to do example, and Brendan is right there consistently referenced like a piece of gym equipment that doesn't get much love but never quite leaves the gym. And the wild part is, this role, designated punching bag, actually functions as a kind of job security. Every scene needs a floor. Somebody has to be the answer to, at least I'm not that guy. As long as that role exists, and as long as Brendan is willing to keep occupying it in public, on camera, on multiple shows a week, he's not going anywhere. You cannot get rid of the floor. Everyone else is standing on it. Here's where it stops being simple, though, because Brendan is not just quietly absorbing all of this. Starting in late 2025 and running well into 2026, he's been visibly, audibly frustrated with the same ecosystem that keeps using him as its punching bag, and he's said so out loud on his own shows. He's complained about comedians who, in his telling, owe him for stage time or exposure and don't return the favor. He said flatly that there are people in this circle he simply won't work with anymore.
Nah, I'm with Schultz on that. There's this culture, and it's mainly a comic thing, where these guys, especially Rogan, even Firing the Kid, we've given so many people platforms, and then they want to talk, or they're going to. So let's say you brought Mark Maron on this show, and he started going bad on Rogan. I promise you, I wouldn't add to it, or I wouldn't even give him a platform. But they decided to, so we just got to be like, oh, it's all good, it's harmless. I think it's behavior. I think it's soft. I think it's what's wrong with comedy.
He's gotten heated on mic about loyalty inside a scene that's supposedly built entirely around loyalty, arguing with his own co-hosts about whether other comedians in the Rogan orbit are actually on the team or just renting space in it. And look, you can feel the contradiction in real time when you listen to it. He's trying to draw a hard line against the exact same ecosystem that his entire career depends on for its audience, its bookings, and its relevance. He wants the benefits of being Rogansphere adjacent, the built-in audience, the crossover appeal, the instant name recognition, without anyone in that world getting to have an opinion about him. That's like wanting to be a member of the co-op, but also wanting veto power over the other members. It doesn't really work that way. And on some level, he knows it, which is exactly why the rants keep happening. You don't yell at a room you're not still standing in. There's an even more pointed version of this, and it says a lot. Brendan has, on more than one occasion, floated the idea that he could actually beat Joe Rogan in a fight, not as a full-blown challenge, more as one of those half-joking, half-serious claims that only make sense between two guys who've known each other for over a decade. But notice who he picked. Not some rival comedian, not a random troll online. The guy who ended his fighting career and then got him a podcast career instead. That's the clearest possible sign of where the actual friction lives. It isn't only Brendan doing the arguing either. Earlier this year, one of his own Golden Hour co-hosts got into it with him, on air, over politics inside the scene itself. A reminder that the Rogansphere isn't some unified front that agrees on everything except Brendan. It's a bunch of individually opinionated people who happen to share an audience, a club, and a group chat, and who occasionally turn that same energy on each other. Brendan's just the one it lands on most often, because he's the one who keeps taking the bait on camera. Here's my actual read on this segment of his behavior. because I think it's the most human part of the whole story. I don't think Brendan is wrong that people in this scene take cheap shots at him. I think he's right about that. I just think he's misdiagnosing why it keeps happening. It's not because the Rogansphere secretly hates him. It's because he's useful to it in exactly the role he keeps trying to fight his way out of. Every time he pushes back hard in public, he generates another clip, another headline, another reason for people to talk about him, which, ironically, is the one thing that actually keeps him relevant inside a scene this crowded. He's fighting the machine, using the machine's own fuel. This is the part of the video where I want to make the argument directly, because I think it's the actual answer to the title. Neither side can afford to let this end. Start with what Brendan needs from the Rogansphere. He needs the built-in audience that comes from proximity to Rogan, the crossover viewers who show up because they recognize him from JRE Fight Night broadcasts, not because they sought out his stand-up. And that pipeline is still very much active. Go check the guest list on Rogan's Fight companion streams, and Brendan's name shows up repeatedly all the way into 2026. He was on one as recently as this March, alongside Joey Diaz and Eddie Bravo. 11 years after the intervention, he is still functionally in the room. Now flip it around. What does the Rogansphere get out of keeping him? Partly it's the punching bag utility we already covered, but there's something more structural underneath that, and it showed up clearly during an actual financial crisis a few years back. When the podcast network Cast Media collapsed financially in 2023 and owed well over $1 million to a long list of creators, Theo Vaughn, Jason Ellis, Whitney Cummings, and others, all said publicly they were shorted. The company's parent Live One borrowed $1.7 million from an online lender, specifically to pay off the roughly $1.6 million Cast Media owed Brendan Schaub. Sit with that for a second, because I think it's the single clearest piece of evidence in this entire video. This wasn't fans defending him or Rogan being sentimental. This was a business under real financial pressure, choosing to prioritize paying Brendan Schaub over paying several other, arguably more commercially successful creators. Whatever you think of his stand-up, somebody with a spreadsheet decided he was worth going into debt for. That's not a guy limping along on the edge of this ecosystem, tolerated out of pity. That's a guy the infrastructure keeps making sure gets paid first. So here's the mutual dependency, stated plainly. If the Rogansphere actually cut Brendan loose completely, it would lose its clearest example of "we take care of our own," a story that's genuinely useful to a scene that markets itself on loyalty. And if Brendan actually left the Rogansphere, he'd lose the only stage where his entire biography, football, the UFC, the intervention, the podcasts, makes sense as one continuous story instead of four unrelated ones. Neither side is walking away from that trade. It's a bad breakup that keeps not happening, because both people, if they're honest, are getting something out of staying. Even the logistics of it tell you something. Go listen to their own fan questions episode from when the move was still being planned, and you'll hear Brendan and Brian working through it in real time, hunting for a new studio, figuring out where their longtime producer needs to relocate to, and noting almost offhand that once they're out there, they'll finally be in that scene in a way Los Angeles never let them be. That's not somebody being dragged to Austin. That's somebody rearranging an entire production business to be closer to the center of gravity.
Edward Castillo 178 wants to know, what's the next step for you boys after Austin?
Fame and fortune. Fame and fortune and Mars. I
haven't even thought about it. We're just trying to get that thing fired up.
Yeah.
I mean, because you with the bill, well, with all that stuff, so you find a new studio. It has to not only look for a studio, but I need a space too. That's also a shop, so I still do all the truck and car content. Fits Fighting the Kid, fits the shop show in a good area, kind of in between me and Brian. Then you got to build it out. Chin has to find his crib out there. So it's like you're dealing with all that stuff. I have some idea. Like I would like to. Me and Brian were talking about at lunch today. I'd like to add some more content for TFATK, whether it's behind Patreon or just on here regular.
Yeah, me too.
I think we'll be able to do a lot more stuff out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another one from the same person. Do you ever think-
But real quick, also in Austin, like I think for you too, you also be a lot more at the mothership.
Yep.
You'll be like more in that scene because out here you're not in the scene.
Not
For
at all.
you out there, you'd be more in that
That's
comedy
right.
scene.
That's
yeah.
right. So I'm looking forward to that. There's so many different venues where you can do stand up. And I need that. Keeps me sharp.
Yeah.
Getting out there.
They moved an entire production business 2 states over to be closer to the center of this thing on the record out loud months before the moving truck showed up. That's what it actually looks like when the pull of a scene is stronger than the inconvenience of relocating for it. So zoom all the way out, because this is where I think the real point of the video lives. Brendan Schaub is a useful lens for understanding the actual ceiling of this whole model, the Rogan orbit, association first version of comedy, because he demonstrates in real time exactly how far proximity can carry you and exactly where it stops being able to do the rest of the job for you. He got the UFC run, he got the Rogan cosign, he got the built-in podcast audience, the specials, the tours, the network of shows, almost every door that this specific ecosystem is capable of opening, opened for him. And he's still, by most honest accounts, including the ones from inside his own circle, considered somewhere in the lower tier of the actual comedians in it. That's not a personal failure so much as it's a genuinely interesting data point. It tells you the ceiling exists. It tells you that branding and access can get you an enormous amount. Bookings, downloads, a Wikipedia page, a spot on fight night. But they cannot fully manufacture the thing itself. At some point, the material has to show up, and no amount of proximity to Joe Rogan writes your jokes for you. Here's my actual opinion on all of this. Since I've spent 5 segments building up to it, I don't think the Rogansphere keeps Brendan around by accident, and I don't think it's really about friendship or loyalty at all, even though that's the language everyone uses. I think it's structural. Any scene that runs on access instead of merit needs at least one visible example of someone who got all the access and still landed in the middle of the pack, because that's the proof the scene isn't purely a closed loop. He's also, and I say this with zero cruelty, a pretty good preview of what happens to a lot of these orbit comedians eventually, if the scene ever gets smaller or the access stops mattering as much. He's a few years ahead of that curve, not because he's uniquely unlucky, but because he had the least raw material to begin with and the most opportunity anyway. Everyone else in the Rogansphere, who's currently riding pure access instead of pure material, is looking at a slightly earlier draft of the exact same outcome. So, why can't the Rogansphere quit Brendan Schaub? Not because nobody's tried. Rogan tried, and it worked, just not on the part he was actually trying to fix. Comedians in the scene take shots at him constantly, and it doesn't remove him, it just refreshes the content. He's tried to fight his way out of his own role in it, and every time, the fighting itself becomes the new reason people are talking about him. He can't leave because this is the only stage where his whole story adds up. And they can't fully cut him loose because he's proof of concept for the thing this entire scene is selling, that access and loyalty mean something here, even when the material doesn't. Every scene needs somebody like this. Most of them just aren't honest enough to admit it, and most of the guys playing the role aren't self-aware enough to notice they're playing it. Brendan, somewhere underneath the podcast t-shirts and the Rogansphere joke page, has clearly noticed. He just decided the better move was to lean all the way in rather than fight his way out. And given how many times fighting his way out has failed, it's honestly hard to argue with the strategy. So next time someone tells you the Rogansphere is done with Brendan Schaub, that this is finally the year it happens, don't check his stand-up. Check the guest list on the next Fight Night stream. Check whose name is still on the marquee. My guess, he's still in the room. He's just waiting for the next thing to go slightly wrong so somebody can explain him to you all over again.
Favorite part was that dude Austin going, "You guys are just gonna freestyle up there? I'm worried for you guys." I went, "Oh, buddy,
Wait,
I'm
who
more
said
worried
this?
about the
I feel like
acoustics."
Chin was saying this, and I go, "Chin, have you?"
No,
we're
Chin
good."
didn't say that. Austin said that. Austin Awake, the guy who said,
yes, Austin's cool. Yeah,
He's like, "Man, I'm
but
worried for you guys." I went,
you know who's been
"Oh,
freestyling
buddy."
up there?
No,
Chin and little
Oh, no, they were good. No, they were good.
If there's a piece of this you think I missed, a beef, a rant, a Rogansphere data point, put it in the comments. I read all of them, even the ones defending him. Especially those, honestly. Like the video if you made it to the end. Subscribe if you want the next one.